Part 1. The shock. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have. My hands trembled as I held it, even though I'd been expecting this moment for weeks. Thursday, 4:47 p.m. Henry's office smelled like stale coffee and broken promises. "Amelia," he said, not even looking up from his computer screen. 12 years of partnership, and he couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, but we have to let you go. Budget cuts. You understand." I understood more than he knew. "Thank you for everything," he continued, his voice flat and rehearsed. "HR will handle the details. You can clear out your desk tomorrow morning." I should have been angry. I should have screamed, demanded explanations, fought for the career I'd built from nothing. Instead, I smiled. A real smile, not the practiced one I'd worn for years in client meetings. "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. "I appreciate everything this company has given me." Henry finally looked up, surprised by my calm response. He expected tears, maybe even begging. He had no idea that I'd already won. I walked out of his office with my head high, past the curious glances of my former colleagues, past the reception desk where I'd greeted thousands of visitors, past the conference room where I'd pitched the ideas that made this company millions. But I wasn't walking away defeated. I was walking toward freedom. Part 2. The Foundation. 12 years ago, I was 26 and desperate. Fresh out of business school with student loans that kept me awake at night, I'd answered an ad for a junior marketing position at Henderson & Associates. The pay was modest, but Henry Henderson himself had interviewed me, and something in his eyes made me believe this could be home. Those first years were intoxicating. I lived and breathed the company, arriving early and leaving late, volunteering for every project, every client dinner, every weekend presentation. While my friends were dating and traveling, I was building campaigns that transformed small businesses into industry leaders. I remember the first time Henry called me into his office, not to fire me, but to congratulate me. The Morrison account, a struggling restaurant chain, had seen a 400% increase in revenue after implementing my social media strategy. "Amelia," he'd said, his eyes bright with pride, "you're not just an employee here. You're family." Family. The word had wrapped around my heart like a warm blanket. I'd grown up in foster care, bounced between homes where I was always temporary, always expendable. But here, in this glass building with its humming fluorescent lights and endless coffee supplies, I'd found belonging. I threw myself deeper into the work. Missed Christmas dinners to handle crisis communications. Canceled vacations to launch new campaigns. Worked through fevers and heartbreak because the company needed me. Because Henry needed me. The promotions came steadily. Junior marketing associate to marketing manager to senior marketing director. My salary grew, my office got bigger, my responsibilities expanded. I hired my own team, mentored new graduates, became the person others looked to for guidance. But more than that, I became indispensable. I knew every client's quirks, every campaign's history, every competitor's weakness. I was the institutional memory, the keeper of relationships, the one who could solve problems before they became crises. "What would we do without you?" Henry would joke at company parties. Everyone would laugh, but I knew it wasn't really a joke. I was the backbone of Henderson & Associates, and everyone knew it. Or so I thought. Part 3. The Cracks. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday in March. I was grabbing coffee in the break room when I heard voices from the conference room, Henry's voice, and another I didn't recognize. "She's been here too long," the unfamiliar voice was saying. "Her salary is way above market rate for someone her age. If we bring in someone younger, hungrier, we could cut costs by 40%. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips. "But Amelia knows everything," Henry replied. "She's irreplaceable." "Everyone's replaceable," the voice countered. "Besides, knowledge can be transferred. We just need to be strategic about it." I set down my mug carefully, my hands suddenly unsteady. They were talking about me. They had to be. I was the only long-term employee whose age and salary would fit that description. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. Small things, but unsettling. Henry's meetings that I wasn't invited to. Conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. A new consultant who seemed to be around more and more, asking questions about my processes, my client relationships, my methods. Then came the performance review. "Amelia, you're a valuable asset to this company," Henry had said, but his tone was different. Clinical. "However, we need to discuss some areas for improvement." Areas for improvement. After 12 years of stellar reviews, suddenly I was struggling with efficiency and adaptability to new technologies. The review was filled with criticisms I'd never heard before, problems that seemed to materialize from thin air. I signed the document because I had to, but that night I went home and pored over every email, every project report, every piece of feedback I'd received in the past year. Nothing supported his claims. Nothing. That's when I knew. This wasn't about performance. This was about cost cutting, about replacing someone who'd grown too expensive with someone cheaper and more controllable. But knowing and proving are different things. Part 4, the investigation. I became a detective in my own workplace. It felt surreal, gathering evidence about my own impending termination, but I couldn't just sit and wait for the axe to fall. I started paying attention to everything. The new consultant, Jessica, was supposedly there to optimize our marketing processes, but I noticed she was being trained on tasks that were specifically mine. Client relationship management. Campaign oversight. Budget allocation. I stayed late one evening, ostensibly to finish a project, but really to access files I wasn't supposed to see. The budget projections for the next quarter were illuminating. There was a line item for personnel restructuring that would save the company exactly what my salary and benefits cost. But the real revelation came from an accidentally forwarded email. Henry had meant to send it to Jessica, but it landed in my inbox instead. The subject line read, "Transition Timeline." My hands shook as I read it. They had it all planned out. Phase 1, document performance issues to build a case. Phase 2, train replacement while maintaining plausible deniability. Phase 3, termination during the slower Q2 period to minimize disruption. I was currently in Phase 2. The email chain went back months. They'd been planning this since February, carefully building a narrative that would justify my dismissal. False complaints from clients who'd actually praised my work. Efficiency metrics that were skewed and unfair. A paper trail designed to make my firing seem inevitable and justified. I printed everything. Every email, every document, every piece of evidence that showed this wasn't about performance, it was about money. I made copies, stored them in multiple locations, and began building my own case. But I wasn't building it for a wrongful termination lawsuit. I was building it for something much better. Part 5, the preparation. While Henry and Jessica thought they were playing me, I was playing a completely different game. They were focused on removing me quietly and efficiently. I was focused on something far more strategic, my own future. I'd always been good at my job, but I'd never considered that my skills might be valuable outside of Henderson and Associates. Now, forced to evaluate my worth in the market, I realized I'd been undervaluing myself for years. I began networking, but carefully. Lunch meetings with former colleagues who'd moved to other companies. Coffee chats with clients who'd become friends. Casual conversations at industry events about hypothetical opportunities. The response was overwhelming. 3 companies immediately expressed interest in hiring me. 2 offered to match my current salary. 1 offered 20% more. But I had a different plan. I'd been managing multi-million-dollar campaigns for years, but always under the Henderson and Associates banner. What if I managed them under my own? What if, instead of being an expensive employee, I became a strategic partner? I started my own consultancy. Quietly, carefully, making sure everything was legal and above board. I registered the business, set up the bank accounts, created the contracts. I even secured my first client, a former Henderson and Associates account that had been dissatisfied with their recent service. "We'd love to work with you directly, Amelia," the client had said. "You're the one who really understands our business anyway." That's when I realized the true scope of Henry's mistake. In his focus on cutting costs, he'd failed to understand that many of our clients weren't loyal to the company, they were loyal to me. I was the relationship. I was the value. I spent my evenings building my business while spending my days pretending nothing had changed. I was the perfect employee, completing projects with my usual excellence, training Jessica with patience and thoroughness, attending meetings with enthusiasm. All while knowing exactly what was coming. Part 6: The Performance. The day Henry fired me, I was ready. I'd been ready for weeks. I played my part perfectly. The shocked employee, the devoted worker who never saw it coming. I even let my voice tremble a little when I said goodbye to my team, knowing they genuinely cared about me and would be hurt by my departure. But inside, I was calm. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. I cleaned out my desk the next morning, packing 12 years of memories into cardboard boxes. My colleagues whispered sympathetically, expressing outrage about budget cuts and poor management. I thanked them for their support, hugged them goodbye, and walked out of Henderson and Associates for the last time. 3 hours later, I was in my new office, a sleek co-working space downtown, taking my first call as the founder of Amelia Strategic Solutions. "Amelia?" The client's voice was warm with relief. "Thank goodness you're still available. We heard about Henderson and Associates, and we were hoping you might be interested in handling our account independently." Within a week, I had 5 clients. Within a month, I had 12. By the end of the quarter, I was earning more than I'd ever made as an employee, with the freedom to choose my projects and set my own schedule. But the real satisfaction came from watching Henderson and Associates struggle without me. Part 7: The Aftermath. Jessica, it turned out, was not the marketing genius Henry had hoped she'd be. She was competent, certainly, but she lacked the deep relationships and institutional knowledge that had made me irreplaceable. The Morrison account, the restaurant chain that had been my first major success, terminated their contract within 6 weeks of my departure. They cited declining service quality and loss of strategic insight. 2 other major clients followed. Then 3 more. I heard about it through industry gossip, former colleagues who reached out to commiserate and ended up sharing more than they probably should have. The company was hemorrhaging accounts, struggling to maintain the quality of work that had been their reputation. Henry called me in June. I was sitting in my new office, sunlight streaming through windows that actually opened, when my phone rang. "Amelia," he said, his voice strained. "I hope you're doing well. I wanted to talk to you about a potential consulting opportunity." I almost laughed. "I'm listening." "We're having some challenges with client retention," he continued. "Some of our long-time accounts are, well, they're asking for you specifically. I was hoping we might be able to work out some kind of arrangement." Now I did laugh. "What kind of arrangement?" Henry. A partnership. A consulting contract. We could work together on the accounts that know you best, and you could help us transition the relationships more smoothly. I let the silence stretch between us. He was asking me to save the company that had cast me aside. To rescue the man who'd fired me after 12 years of loyalty. I appreciate the offer, I said finally. But I'm afraid I'm not available. My own clients keep me quite busy. Amelia, please. I know we didn't handle your departure well, but... Henry, I interrupted, my voice gentle but firm. You taught me something important when you fired me. You taught me that loyalty is only valuable when it's mutual. When it's respected. When it's earned. He was quiet for a long moment. I made a mistake. You made a choice, I corrected. And now I'm making mine. Part 8, The Transformation. 6 months after leaving Henderson & Associates, I barely recognized my life. I was working fewer hours but earning more money. I was choosing projects that excited me rather than accepting whatever walked through the door. I was building something that belonged to me, something that couldn't be taken away by budget cuts or corporate restructuring. But more than that, I was finally understanding my own worth. For 12 years, I'd defined myself by my job, by my usefulness to others, by my ability to be indispensable. I'd thought that made me valuable. But it had actually made me vulnerable. True value comes from knowing who you are and what you bring to the world. It comes from building something that's yours, something that reflects your vision and your values. It comes from refusing to be treated as disposable. I started speaking at industry conferences, sharing my story and the lessons I'd learned. Not about revenge or bitterness, but about resilience and reinvention. About the power of preparation and the importance of knowing your worth. The best thing that ever happened to me, I would tell audiences, was being fired from my dream job. Because it forced me to stop dreaming about someone else's vision and start building my own. The audiences would laugh, but I meant every word. That manila envelope, heavy with its message of rejection, had actually been a gift. It had given me permission to stop playing it safe, to stop settling for someone else's definition of success. Part 9, The New Chapter. A year after that Thursday afternoon in Henry's office, I was managing a team of 5 employees in my own company. We occupied a full floor in a modern building, with exposed brick walls and conference rooms named after female entrepreneurs rather than corporate buzzwords. My former colleagues at Henderson & Associates would occasionally reach out, some looking for jobs, others just wanting to reconnect. I welcomed them all warmly, but I could see the questions in their eyes. How had I done it? How had I gone from fired employee to successful entrepreneur so quickly? The answer wasn't really about strategy or planning, though those had been important. It was about something deeper, the willingness to bet on myself. For too long, I'd been afraid to take risks because I'd convinced myself that security was more important than growth. That a steady paycheck was better than uncertain potential. That being valued by others was more important than valuing myself. But security is an illusion. The safe job can disappear overnight, as I'd learned firsthand. The company that claims your family can disown you without warning. The only real security comes from knowing you can create value wherever you go. I kept the manila envelope from that day in Henry's office. It sits in my desk drawer now, a reminder of the moment everything changed. Not because I was fired, but because I finally understood that being unwanted by the wrong people is often the first step toward being essential to the right ones. My clients don't just hire me for my marketing expertise. They hire me because I understand what it means to rebuild from the ground up. I know how to take an impossible situation and find the opportunity hidden inside it. I know how to turn endings into beginnings. Part 10, The Lesson. People often ask me if I regret those 12 years at Henderson and Associates. If I feel like I wasted my time, invested my energy in people who didn't deserve it. I don't. Those 12 years taught me everything I needed to know about business, about relationships, about the difference between being busy and being productive. They taught me how to manage teams, how to handle crises, how to build strategies that actually work. But more importantly, they taught me about myself. About my capacity for loyalty, my ability to work hard, my talent for seeing solutions where others see problems. They taught me that I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined. Henry thought he was cutting costs when he fired me. He thought he was making a smart business decision, replacing an expensive employee with a cheaper alternative. He never understood that he wasn't just losing an employee, he was losing a relationship architect, a problem solver, a person who had spent 12 years learning how to make his company successful. His mistake wasn't just ethical, it was strategic. In his focus on the immediate savings, he'd failed to calculate the long-term costs. The lost clients, the damaged reputation, the institutional knowledge that walked out the door with me. But I'm grateful for his short-sightedness. It forced me to see myself clearly, to understand my value in the marketplace, to stop settling for someone else's vision of my future. The hardest part of the whole experience wasn't being fired. It was realizing how much of my identity I'd tied to that job, how much of my self-worth I'd derived from being needed by people who ultimately didn't need me at all. Recovery meant learning to need myself. To trust my own judgment. To build something based on my own vision rather than someone else's expectations. It meant understanding that being fired wasn't a failure, it was a liberation. Epilogue, the return. 2 years after leaving Henderson and Associates, I received an invitation that made me smile. The company was hosting its annual awards dinner, and they wanted to honor their alumni of distinction, former employees who had gone on to achieve notable success. I was their first nomination. I almost declined. Not out of bitterness, but because I'd moved so far beyond that chapter of my life. Henderson and Associates felt like something from my past, a place where a different version of myself had once worked. But ultimately, I decided to attend. Not to prove anything to Henry or to show off my success, but to demonstrate something important, that departures don't have to be defeats. That endings can be beginnings. That sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is to let you go. Henry approached me during the cocktail hour, looking older than I remembered, his smile uncertain. "Amelia," he said, extending his hand. "Congratulations on everything you've accomplished. I always knew you had it in you." I shook his hand, noting the irony of his words. "Thank you, Henry. And thank you for giving me the push I needed to discover it." He looked confused for a moment, then laughed nervously. "Well, I suppose it all worked out for the best." "It did," I agreed. "For both of us." During my acceptance speech, I talked about the journey from that Thursday afternoon to this moment. About the fear and uncertainty that had followed my termination, but also about the excitement and possibility that had eventually emerged. Sometimes, I told the audience, the best thing that can happen to us is the worst thing that can happen to us. Sometimes we need to be pushed out of our comfort zones to discover what we're really capable of. I looked out at the crowd, seeing familiar faces from my past mixed with new ones from my present. Two worlds colliding, two versions of myself meeting in the same room. Being fired was the best thing that ever happened to me, I concluded. Not because I enjoyed it, but because it forced me to grow. It forced me to stop accepting less than I deserved. It forced me to bet on myself. The applause was warm and genuine. Afterward, several people approached me with their own stories of professional setbacks that had led to personal breakthroughs. Former colleagues who had left the company to start their own businesses. Employees who had been laid off and discovered new passions. People who had learned, as I had, that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. As I drove home that night, I thought about the woman who had walked out of Henry's office 2 years earlier. She had been hurt, confused, afraid of an uncertain future. She had felt betrayed by people she trusted, discarded by a company she'd served faithfully. But she had also been brave. She had chosen to see opportunity in crisis, to build something new from the ashes of something old. She had refused to be defeated by other people's decisions about her worth. That woman had become me. And I had become someone I never could have imagined when I was just an employee hoping to keep my job. The manila envelope is still in my desk drawer, a reminder of the day everything changed. But now it represents something different than it did then. Not rejection, but redirection. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not a failure, but a gift. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is the worst thing that can happen to you. Sometimes you need to be broken to discover how strong you really are. Sometimes you need to be fired to learn that you were never really an employee at all. You were always an entrepreneur. You just needed permission to believe it. The end. Author's note: this story is dedicated to everyone who has ever felt undervalued, overlooked, or cast aside. Your worth is not determined by other people's recognition of it. Your value is not dependent on their approval. Sometimes the greatest gift you can receive is the gift of necessity, the necessity to discover who you really are when everything you thought you knew about yourself is stripped away. The best revenge is not revenge at all. It's success. It's building something beautiful from the pieces of something broken. It's becoming so authentically yourself that you can't imagine being anything else. You are not disposable. You are not replaceable. You are not too expensive or too old or too anything. You are exactly who you need to be to build exactly what the world needs you to build. The only question is, when will you give yourself permission to start?